Hi, I'm Dave Hill. I'm an outdoor ed teacher at John Abbott College, and you're tuned in to Climate Action Figures.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Climate Action Figures. My name is John Whidden, and this week on the show, you will get to meet David Hill. But first, this week's Quick Fix, which comes from Bertha, Sophia, and Quinn in Grenville-sur-la-Rouge. Grandmother and grandchildren tell us, when shopping, first, check where things come from, because the further away, the more fuel's burned. Secondly, choose minimal packaging. Third, choose recycled or reused when possible. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, ask yourself, do I really need this? So with that, let's bring David into the conversation. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks. Thank you so
Tell
much.
us your thoughts about this quick fix.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's so multifaceted, and it takes into account so many aspects of living sustainably that it's a really nice strategy and approach. It's so important for us to think about how far things have traveled to get to us. It's so important for us to think about the amount of waste that's generated by the purchases that we make, the materials that were used. Were they recycled? Have they had a previous life before? Those are all super important things. And then lastly, do I need it? That's, how can we counter consumer culture any better than that?
Right. Now, David, we were connected through one of your colleagues named Jessica, and this sort of ties into what you do. Normally we talk with youth on this program, but we're talking with you. We're going to give you an honorary youth title today because you work with youth all the time. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your colleague Jessica and what you do there?
Yeah, well, both Jessica and I are incredibly privileged to work with young people in a college setting. And Jessica and I team teach a course together that's called Camping to Save the Planet. And it's been an amazing journey. And Jessica is just an incredible powerhouse. She's the coordinator of our environmental studies program. And she is really the conduit by which, as you know, you and I were connected through her, but so many things channel through her to the college to keep us all abreast of what's happening and what the latest developments are and what strategies and things we can do and incorporate into our lives to live more sustainably. And yeah, we teach this course, Camping to Save the Planet, and its precursor was a course that I taught before called Eco Camping. And Eco Camping was essentially looking at the leave no trace, low impact camping principles and considering them as a metaphor for sustainable living in our day-to-day lives. So we were looking at, planning ahead and preparing, disposing of waste properly, respecting wildlife, and there's seven principles. And we were looking at ways that we could superimpose or juxtapose those on our daily lives to allow us to live. It's great when we go out into the bush to be thinking about how our presence impacts the natural world, but so many of us, it's like after the trip is over, we were back to our old habits again. So it was kind of looking at what can we do more, and just like your quick fix from your previous guests, how can we find things like that we can incorporate in our daily lives? So that was the beginning of eco camping. And what I found was that the whole being immersed in nature experience just really allowed people to bond and problem solve and enhance conflict resolution. All of those things sort of came from trying to live sustainably with a bunch of other young people, and many of whom didn't know each other. And so then it was like, well, how can we take it to the next step? We've got the outdoor adventure kind of component. We've got the community component, but how can we bring things more to the forefront in terms of environmental activism? That's where Jessica was so instrumental in trying to bring in that element. So what we wound up with was an eco camping course with a huge emphasis on community building and really breaking down barriers between people so that people could be their most authentic selves. We really wanted to create a nurturing environment where people could step outside their comfort zones and really feel like everybody else had their backs. And then it was with that, once people are in that kind of zone and feel like they can be their most authentic selves, how can we channel that energy into the things that are most meaningful for them with respect to taking care of the planet? So we have this camping component, we have this sort of human development component, and then we have the activism component. And together, she and I developed this course to fusion all three, and that was the beginnings of what later became Project Oasis.
Before we go on to Project Oasis, are these programs unique to this college? Does the outdoors and the environment infuse the whole college, or is it one section of what happens there?
Well, I think it's becoming more systemic of the college zeitgeist, if you will. There are some things that are very unique to John Abbott in the sense that I feel that teachers are given a lot of creative license when it comes to developing courses. And so you see a lot of people who are invested in environmental issues, channeling those interests into their courses. There's a lot of ongoing discussions about climate curriculum and making sure that the climate crisis is not just addressed on the periphery, but that it's actually embraced by the mainstream right through, throughout all of our courses.
Sounds like a very cool place to be. And this makes me think, something I've really believed for a long time is that the future of this planet is clearly in the hands of the youth now, who will be the youth leaders later. And for us as teachers to help them understand the importance of that environment, we need to get them out into that environment. And clearly that's a big part of your job. Is that so? And what do you think about that philosophy about getting kids out into the wild?
That was the beginning for me. When I was doing my master's, my master's project was about the effect of immersing young people in natural environments and how it influences their engagement in environmentally responsible behaviors. So that was really where it all began for me. It's like taking people into the outdoors just has so many positive effects, like in terms of health and wellness, but also in terms of giving them a sense of ownership and a sense of investment in the natural world. When you can actually see how your actions affect water quality, affect, the landscape, affect ecological habitats and vegetation and all of those things and vegetation loss, it really hits home from there.
That sounds like a fascinating thesis and a great place to work and do the thing you love, right? When you get paid for the thing you love, you don't work a day in your life, my dad once said to me.
Not complaining.
Before we leave Jessica in the college, when she introduced us, she was actually introducing me to you and your son, Ryan, who is going to be on the program next week. So without spoiling too much of what he's going to say, do you want to tell us a bit about your son and your relationship in terms of environment and your family's ethos in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess everything has to be contextualized in, both my wife and I have always been invested in environmental sustainability. And so Ryan has grown up in that, but he's really taken it to the next level. And it's interesting because I think for me and many of my colleagues, we have a very cognitive relationship with the natural world, whereas Ryan has a very emotional relationship with the natural world. And, when Ryan was very young, my wife and I started a kids nature group called Earth Song, and we had 15 or 20 kids, and we take them out into the backcountry and teach them survival skills and teach them about nature identification and bird watching and reading tracks and just basically communing with the natural world. And so at some point, it became internalized for him. So as I said, I think there are a lot of people who experience it on an emotional level as well, but Ryan really embodies that in a way that I've never quite experienced before. His whole life has revolved around wanting to protect wildlife. And, from the time he was very little, it started with insects, and then he became enamored with pangolins. And, I'm sure he will tell you about all the efforts he's made to protect pangolins and becoming an ambassador for Save the Pangolins. this is an interesting thing too, which it kind of ties into, I can't think of a better word for it other than karma, because everywhere we go, he winds up attracting people who have something to share or a vehicle to share. You're a great example. It just, these things seem to like fall in his lap. He seems to like really attract that kind of energy to get out, to get information and to disseminate a love for the planet and a need to take care of it and to steward the animals and plants and nature as a
Well,
whole.
he's a remarkable young man. I know this already, and I haven't even interviewed him yet. We're really looking forward to bringing him onto the program next week. And just thinking about what you're saying about his care for the environment, and some people might roll their eyes, but I think, boy, if everybody cared about every creature like that and every part of the earth like that, how different would this world be? Let's turn to a Project Oasis now, something you're really passionate about. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Project Oasis, as I said, it kind of evolved from what Jessica and I were doing in Camping to Save the Planet. And I started asking my students, like, why don't people ask questions when we're having a discussion or when we're having even when I'm lecturing potentially? I think what we're talking about is brilliant and captivating. And sometimes I'm looking and I go, boy, there's a lot of blank faces here. Like, what's going on? So I asked the question, I said, why don't people ask questions? And the number one answer was fear of rejection, fear of being marginalized, fear of being made fun of, fear. It was just fear, 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 fear. So, I realized that the nature and the scope of the things that need to happen for us to effectively address climate change are going to require an enormous amount of courage, an enormous ability to take risks and to confront the possibility that not everybody's going to be happy about what you have to say or what you want to share. So the next step for me was, well, how can we create an environment where students feel empowered to be their most authentic and most powerful selves, and take those risks and do and say the things that need to be said and done for us to effectively address the climate crisis, as well as the greatest challenges in their lives. Because if you have that skill set and you can effectively address climate change, you've got all the tools to effectively address everything in your life, right? Because this is a tall order item that's going to take all the creativity and strength and courage. So essentially, we set up these 4 pillars. So it was basically create an environment where people feel and experience emotional safety. So we focused on the 4 pillars of courage, because it takes courage to be your most authentic self and to step outside your comfort zone and to take risks. Critical thinking, that was a key element, because there's one super important part of that whole concept. I need to be open to whatever other people bring to the table, because if I say, well, this is my belief system and I'm basing it on this, and this is as far as I go, the dialogue stops there. And that's where we see polarization. That's where we see people, picking a camp, and, and debates become very tribalized. So the first 2 pillars, as I said, are courage and critical thinking. The third is gratitude. And part of that is when people bring you something, even if it's not something that you necessarily enjoy, understanding that there's a potential there for that experience or that person or that situation to enrich you as a person. And sometimes it's some of the things that are the most challenging. We have the greatest potential to grow from. And taking the time to express that gratitude, because it has therapeutic effects, not just because, it's a nice thing to do. It's a nice thing to express gratitude, but it actually changes our body chemistry. And then the last pillar is kindness. And kindness is the litmus test for us. It's the thing that we encourage our students to use as a gauge to assess all of their choices. So if you can ask yourself in any given moment when you're interacting with another person, am I being kind? If the voice inside your head is a resounding yes, you're probably on the right track. So those are the 4 pillars. And that's where Project Oasis aims to go, to create these emotionally safe learning environments where people can be their most authentic selves, ask all the questions they need to ask, be as courageous as they can possibly be, and then take that into the world to address the big problems when it comes to climate change and other environmental challenges that we have. And if people want to connect, put my contact information with the podcast, I'd be happy to answer questions that way as well, if that works
Sure,
for
we'll
you.
put that in the show notes today as well. Great. Now, David, we should move on to your climate action because you've got something very unique to share with us for your climate action today. Take it away.
This is a bit of an indelicate topic, and I apologize for that in advance. But what I would like to discuss is toilet paper consumption. I did a bit of a deep dive a couple of years ago into how many trees we cut down to make toilet paper, and it's a tough statistic to track down. Even people who were studying it have had a hard time figuring out the exact numbers. But suffice it to say that there are millions of trees that are cut down every year across the world, and it's fairly reliable to say that over 100 rolls of toilet paper are used by most North Americans every year. So if you do the math, it really adds up.
Okay, so we've fast forwarded so that you can get right to the finished product here. So you'll have to just play with your own toilet paper and figure out what's the best way to get those two plies apart. But now, for those of you who are not watching on YouTube, we're looking at David holding up two separate plies. He's peeled the two plies apart, and you've got a couple of squares in each hand.
So there's three
sheets,
yeah,
a one ply in each hand.
Three sheets is. If I was doing this for the first time, I might start with 4. So I take it, I put the sheets back together. So now they're exactly as they were, except they're not stuck together anymore. And then I fold it in half, like so. And then I fold it in half again. So now I've got 4 ply here in the middle, and then 4 loose sections at the end. So I take the side where the free ends aren't, and that's my, how can I put it delicately? That's the surface that I wipe with. Now I take another sheet, a full sheet. I don't split it in half, but that depends on the nature of the business that you're doing.
Some business easier to deal with than other business.
Exactly. And then this would be my first wipe. And then I take this, I put it in the toilet, but this is still, it's completely clean. It hasn't come into contact with anything.
David's taken the single one and he's put that away, and the other one was just a backing, a just in case backing.
Exactly. So
you've only used one square so far.
I've used one square. There's 3 here, right? Okay. So we've got 3 here. The one that is now in the toilet, because that was the messy one. And typically the first one is the messiest one, and anything after that is going to be sequentially less messy. At this point, I start to fold these sheets over from the back. So this first one comes over like so. Then I do my wipe. Then the second one like so.
Okay, what we're looking at is like the pages of a book being flipped around. Right. The used pages are now facing inside, and the fresh pages are facing outside.
Exactly. And now, and there's the third one. And then I wipe. And then the fourth one. And then I wipe. And now, typically by that point,
we're done.
I'm good. And not quite, but very close. So what I do now is I take all of this and I fold it over, and this is the polish piece. The finishing touches, if we may.
I never thought in the dreaming of this podcast that we would have a special toilet paper session. So that was very unique. I appreciate that. And as you're describing this, I know that there are people who take the toilet paper and just wrap it around their whole hand, because then your hand doesn't get dirty. But guess what, everybody? Right. We're washing our hands anyways, are we not?
Exactly.
And if you've ever had a child and you've changed a diaper, then you realize that feces is not the end of the world. We can clean it off of all kinds of things.
And if this is done well, there's absolutely zero need for any hand feces contact.
Right.
I'll just
in
say
the
that.
ideal world. And if it were to happen when you're learning this whole process, then you can wash your hands.
Exactly.
Right.
But I mean, if you think about it, if we're each using 100 rolls a year, that's, that roll is lasting maximum 4 days. If you're using 6 sheets every time, that could last weeks instead of 3 days.
Well, this is
So,
a very practical
yeah.
climate action that we can all experiment with, and I appreciate that. And I suppose, David, if people aren't quite ready to try this origami method, that they could look at how many plies, how thick
Absolutely.
it is. Some of it's 4-ply,
Yeah.
I think, isn't it?
There are 4-ply, and there are toilet papers that use zero post-consumer paper. So, look and see, is it, because I mean, this is quite a comfortable roll, if I do say so myself, and it's 100% recycled post-consumer.
That's great. And you've clearly looked into this. So as I walk into the grocery store, greenwashing is everywhere. So when I'm looking at those rolls of toilet paper, what's the key thing?
So 2 things I would say, and I'm really glad you asked that question, because in the past, in a previous incarnation of my life, I've looked for the green packaging. When you talk about greenwashing, a lot of companies that are using all virgin fibers have green packaging because they know that people see the green packaging and they go, oh, that must be the environmentally friendly one. So I would say, first off, don't let the colors guide your choices. It has to say some percentage of post-consumer recycled materials.
Those are the keywords. Like, we need to look for those specific words? Okay.
Yes.
That's great. So thank you for that practical example of what we can do in our lives. Before we wrap up today, David, I need to ask you, what gives you hope in the world today?
Young people, 100% young people, just young people being courageous, young people being inquisitive, young people taking small positive actions, like random acts of kindness, doing their part. I have a friend who sent me an email once, and at the bottom it said, a hero is someone who does what they can. And, that just really resonates for me. It doesn't have to be grand gestures and lobbying governments. It can be cycling to work, cycling to school. It can be reducing waste, buying things that have less packaging. It can be, all those little things count. And it's going to take some big actions to make significant headway with respect to the climate crisis. But every little thing that we do gives that whole journey momentum. It gives that whole movement momentum. And that's what we need. We need more momentum and more awareness. And every time someone does a small thing, it has a ripple effect, and other people see it, and other people emulate it, and other people are inspired by it. I think we have a real shot at getting ahead of this.
Well, thank you very much for that, David. And thanks for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much, John.
And thank you, listener. We will look forward to being back with you again next week, same time, same place, to hear from another climate action figure. And this time it will be someone who David knows well, his son, Ryan. Until then,
go figures!
This has been Climate Action Figures. Our show is produced and hosted by John Whidden. Our creative consultant is Kayla McIntosh. Our theme song is Hawaii Vacation by Tavari. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Climate Action Figures. That's all one word. And if you have any other questions or comments that arose from this or any episode, feel free to reach out to us at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another Climate Action Figure.